This is Orange Nation Overtime with Stephen Fonte and Paulie Sibilia.
Welcome into Orange Nation Overtime alongside Paulie Sibilia. I'm Stephen Fonte, and a big hiring for the SU football program over the weekend. Vince Karras, defensive coordinator from Toledo, has accepted the defensive coordinator position at Syracuse. Had several options on the table. Nebraska wanted him. Toledo wanted him potentially as the head coach there. UConn wanted him. There was a report out that another ACC school was after him. But Vince Karras has decided to come to Syracuse University to lead the defense here. Big get for Fran Brown in the Orange.
Yeah, he got the guy he wanted, it looks like, first try. And that's a good thing when you go out and you get someone you want. And we fought, I'll say it a little less argumentative because it's not sports radio right now, that, it's a great hire, but let's see it translate to good defense.
Yeah, and you look at his resume, and I mean, his resume speaks for itself. He, won a national title as a player, as an assistant, as a head coach at Mount Union. He was a player at Mount Union, then worked under his dad there as an assistant coach, became the head coach, very successful run at Mount Union, and then went to Toledo, and he's been fabulous for the last 6 years. They've got the number 2 ranked defense in the country in terms of yards allowed this year, behind only Ohio State. 4th in scoring defense. It's been a very impressive run there for his last 6 years, and he comes here with again a lot of experience, a lot of success, and I think he's got to like the fact that there are a lot of young players on defense right now, young and talented players, and the fact that he picked Syracuse over those other options leads me to believe that he thinks he can come here and be successful here.
That's the thing that concerns me the most right now, Stephen. Does it concern you that the age of this team right now? Because we saw down the stretch a lot of freshmen playing. They're only going to be sophomores next year. Their only experience was losing it big to teams. Are you worried about that? And how important is this portal season for Syracuse?
I mean, I think it is important, and I think that you got to find that proper mix. And when Fran arrived, he looked at it as, all right, got to get good from the portal right away. Got to get experienced from the portal. They brought in Kyle McCord. They had some holdovers from Dino's time here, obviously, with, the Marlo Waxes and Aronde Gadstons and LaQuint Allens. And he was able to mix in the veterans that came back with some veterans from the portal, and he didn't really need to rely on the young players. And now he's, working on another recruiting class. He really likes the one that, they were freshmen this year. They're going to be sophomores next year, as you said. There is youth. But you have to find that proper mix of you can't be completely young because you're going to be overmatched. I think he likes the talent that he has from the freshmen and sophomores, but he's going to have to supplement that with some experienced guys from the portal. I don't think there's any question about that.
Going to have to get an experienced backup somehow, which is going to be hard to do. At the quarterback position, you got to get older on the offensive line. You got to stay healthy on the offensive line, and you've got to hope that the receivers who were young this year and catching all of Evangeli's balls can continue to do that next year.
Yeah, and you hear a lot about the quarterback position, and I get it's the most important position in all of sports, and you're right, they do have to find a competent backup quarterback, but I do think the bigger need out of the portal is what you alluded to, which is up front, not just offensive line, but defensive line as well. They got to get better up front on both sides of the ball, and I think that's got to be the priority. And yes, they need some other things, including a backup quarterback. But as long as Steve Angeli stays healthy, you should be good there. I know you say, well, you can't expect he's going to stay healthy for 12 or 13 games or whatever. Yes, you need a good backup, but I think the more pressing issue is they got to get better up front.
Right, and just because you're a good coach doesn't mean you're going to win, because you need the dudes, and they've got to be able to do that. Fran won when he had the dudes. Now he's got to turn his young guys into those dudes.
Yeah, but I think you bring in a guy in Vince Karras who he's had success wherever he's been. His defense at Toledo has really just progressively gotten better year after year to the point where they're a top 5 defense in the FBS right now in several different categories. So it is a good hire. We should also mention that Syracuse has a new offensive line coach, Juan Castillo, according to Pete Thamel's report today, has been brought on as the new offensive line coach, replacing Dale Williams. He's got a lot of NFL experience, including with Donovan McNabb and the Eagles for quite a bit of time, more than a decade there, from 98 to 2010 with McNabb. And has had several other positions in the NFL, including with the Ravens and Buffalo Bills. So he comes here with a lot of experience to help the offensive line, which is a position that certainly needs some help.
Yeah, and it's been a struggle not just for Fran Brown. It's been a history-long struggle for Syracuse to stay healthy at offensive line and to get dudes that can actually play that position. Fran went out and got big guys. It's just got to translate to staying healthy.
It is a Monday, which means we have Mike McAllister on our Orange Nation radio show today, and we're going to play that interview back for you right now. Mike comes on our Orange Nation TV show quite a bit during the football season, and so we led him off by asking him about this big hire from over the weekend, and we got his thoughts on Vince Karras.
I don't think you can argue with the just raw numbers, right? I think they were second or third in the country in total defense and right around there in terms of points allowed per game as well. Played pretty good defense when they were playing on the road at Kentucky, so at an SEC school where you figure talent-wise they'll be overmatched, and yet they represented themselves pretty well there. So I think he comes with great pedigree. He comes with a lot of success, and a lot of other schools wanted him. So the fact that Syracuse was able to get him, I think that speaks highly to Syracuse's commitment to football from a financial perspective. And then once again, Fran Brown doing a good job at attracting talent at areas of need.
What do you think about the fact that, by all accounts, he'll stick with that 4-2-5, hybrid style that we're used to seeing? Do you think it's a fit for Syracuse?
I think it can be, but I think it depends on some other factors. The talent that you have, especially on the defensive line, is such a key to that. And then how you approach it just from an aggression standpoint. I thought they showed flashes of being a team that could kind of mix up their blitz packages and how they pressured opposing quarterbacks, like the game against Pittsburgh that I'll reference. And then there were times when I thought they were a little bit too passive and just trying to get home with that front four and weren't creative enough trying to generate pressure. So as that Syracuse defensive line gets better, I think the scheme will get better as well. But there's no question that he comes with the pedigree of being really stingy defenses that get after the quarterback, force turnovers, and they keep teams out of the end zone, which Fran said is the number one thing moving forward.
Karras is one of two new coaches that have been hired in the last couple of days. What about this new offensive line coach, Juan Castillo? Lots of NFL experience, including with your team, the Philadelphia Eagles. What can you tell us about him?
Yeah, when I first heard the name, I was like, wait a minute, is that the same guy who was the offensive line coach the entire time that McNabb was in Philly, which is kind of when I started becoming a Philadelphia Eagles fan. So that kind of took me back a little bit. And they always had really, really good offensive lines during that time when they were one of the best teams in the NFL, seemingly year in and year out. So I think the fact that they were able to land someone with that long lineage of pedigree and successful pedigree is a good thing. Now, I understand that it didn't go that great at UCLA, which was his most recent full-time college job in terms of being the actual offensive line coach and not just an assistant offensive line coach. But let's be real. It didn't go well basically anywhere under Deshaun Foster at UCLA. That was just a complete train wreck. So given his history and his 40-plus years of being a good offensive line coach, it's easy to kind of forgive that little blip. But hard to argue with the resume that he brings to Syracuse.
Mike, do you know what's changed at Syracuse? The three of us all grew up in this area and watching this, and we were told you couldn't afford coaches here. You could, I pushed that narrative. What do you think has changed with Syracuse financially that's allowing all this to happen?
Well, I think the fact that they had the good first year under Fran Brown, and when he took the job, I'm sure there were some discussions about what the financial commitment would look like in order to attract the type of coaches that he wanted. And the fact that people rallied around him, I think, is a huge part of it. But then at the same time, as much flack as John Wildack gets for various things, I don't think they have the purse strings open the way that they do in order to get some of these coaches, if not for his effort. So I think he deserves a little bit of credit in this whole thing as well. It's clearly a commitment right from the top down in terms of wanting to be able to attract the best coaches that you can, not only from the head coaching perspective, but all the assistants as well.
He brings in a couple new coaches. He also lost a couple coaches over the weekend as well. Elijah Robinson off to LSU, Nick Williams off to Florida State. Both guys are very good at what they do, and recruiting in particular. How will they be missed? How much will they be missed? And how does Fran go about replacing what they do in the recruiting world?
Well, anytime you lose really good recruiting assistants, that's certainly something you're going to have to account for and adjust. But at the same time, that's kind of what Fran Brown's bread and butter is, right? Is recruiting and attracting talent and the relationships that he develops. So perhaps there's just a change in philosophy in terms of, I don't need ace recruiters at every single position. Perhaps I need more player development guys, some better X's and O's guys at some positions, because they complement the skill set that I bring to the table. And then, they can kind of have a more well-rounded staff. I don't know if that's the case. That's just something I've kind of thought of when you take a step back and look at where the production has been or hasn't been on the defensive side of the ball, some of the changes that are being made, and where they could use some upgrades. That's certainly defensive line has certainly been an area that's been a bit up and down over the last 2 years. So you wonder if perhaps they bring in some guys that are, more established from an X's and O's and player development standpoint, and that will complement what Fran Brown brings to the table from a recruiting standpoint.
Mike, I think the last time we talked to you, we were sweating out the Calvin Russell issue with him pushing back his signing. Do you know what happened there and what led him to actually making the decision?
I don't have any more specifics other than kind of what's been out there, which is the reporting and the rumors were that there were a few schools that called him late, on Tuesday and try to change his mind. And he just kind of wanted to take a step back and just sort of double check and make sure that he really did, Syracuse was really the home for him and came to that conclusion. I wasn't as concerned necessarily that he was going to end up signing with another school. I know Michigan and Miami were two of the schools that were mentioned when he first said he wasn't going to sign that day. But everything that I had heard was that neither of those schools were realistic options for him. And it sounded like LSU and Florida might have been a couple of schools that were among those pushing for him, Florida State a little bit as well. But most of those schools were already there when he originally committed to Syracuse. When you're looking at the Michigans and the Miamis and the Florida States and those types of schools, the Floridas and the LSUs were a little bit different just because they had coaching changes. The thing that I kept coming back to, though, is when looking at LSU in particular, if Lane Kiffin really wanted Calvin Russell, wouldn't he have been recruiting him extremely hard at Ole Miss? And that really wasn't the case, right? So it seemed to me to be more of, Lane Kiffin trying to make a little bit of a splash as opposed to, we really want you and we have a plan for you, et cetera. And I think ultimately when Calvin Russell took a step back and just, kind of thought about things, he came to the same conclusion and ultimately decided to stick with Syracuse.
Mike, what do you think is a realistic expectation of Calvin Russell in year one, just as an athlete at Syracuse University, right? Because we heard he wants to play basketball as well. What's a realistic expectation for his freshman year across the board?
Heisman Trophy, I think, right?
Yeah.
I mean, listen, there's going to be some that are going to think that, right? They're just naturally going to think Calvin Russell, 5-star, he should come in and be one of the nation's best receivers right away. I don't think that's fair for anyone coming out of high school because you just never know how players are going to adjust, how long it's going to take them to adjust. Now, I'm expecting him to be in some capacity in the wide receiver rotation. I don't know that I necessarily expect him to start. I think he could. It really depends on who stays, who leaves, who else do they attract in the transfer portal at the wide receiver position. We just don't know what that group looks like yet. But I think he's going to be in the mix in some capacity. He'll see the field. From a basketball standpoint, I'm not really sure what to expect from him. I haven't seen as much of him in terms of what he brings to the table, but I think he'll be someone that'll make him better in practice. He'll compete, and he'll be someone that, at least for year one, is kind of on the back end of the bench and maybe gets in some garbage time minutes.
What is the rate of he was a 5-star, I think, until Syracuse got involved, right? What is the rate of success of 5 stars translating to the Power 4, would you say?
I guess it depends on what you mean by success. Do you mean that he's starting and contributing in some way? If that's the case, I think it's pretty high. You're probably talking 75% plus at that point. If you're talking fulfilling the expectation that you're going to be a superstar, it's probably less than that, somewhere in the 30 to 50% range, somewhere in that range. But that's kind of guesswork on my end, but that's just kind of what my impression is. But I think it really depends on what you determine success is. And I also think that changes depending on the position, right? Because if you're a 5-star quarterback, if you're just a solid power 4 starter and you're not a superstar quarterback, I think many are going to view you as a disappointment at the college level. If you're a wide receiver, let's say you're Calvin Russell or a Calvin Russell type, and you go to a Power 4 school and you're a starter for 3 years and you put up solid numbers, and then you end up getting either a late NFL look, NFL draft look, or you're an undrafted free agent, you get a training camp invite, and you're just sort of a above average player at the collegiate level, some may view you as a disappointment. I'm not sure I would at that point. So I think position plays a part in terms of what you view as a success as well. But most of the time, the 5 stars end up being a contributor in some fashion.
What do you make of the Malachi James news that he's hitting the portal? And if you read between the lines on his announcement, it almost sounded like he didn't want to leave, but was maybe shown the door. I mean, what do you make of that situation?
That's certainly the way it sounded. And then I found it interesting with the number of coaches that he thanked in that post that he didn't mention the head coach. So I found that a little odd, and maybe that's further evidence that he was asked to leave. I'm not 100% sure on exactly what happened there, but listen, he's got a lot of ability. I think there's a very high ceiling there. I think his speed is about as elite as it gets, right? He's a track star. He contributed from that perspective, but he's struggled staying healthy as well. So I'm not exactly sure where the fault is, whether that's a training thing, whether that's a diagnosis thing from a training staff perspective, what the issue is. But he certainly struggled with injuries. And so the hope is when he goes to his next home that he'll be able to stay healthy and see the fields and he'll be productive.
All right, one last big picture football question before we touch on basketball. Do you think the committee got it right ultimately? Had, 2 spots for 3 teams? They went Alabama, Miami. Notre Dame's left out. Notre Dame's very upset. Do you think the committee got it right ultimately?
I think probably. I would have swapped Notre Dame for Bama for my own personal choice of, maybe not quite having it be the SEC Big Ten Invitational and having, another, I know they're independent, but someone other than those 2 conferences represented a little bit more. But when you look at the resumes next to each other, despite the fact that Alabama has 1 more loss, they're basically ahead of Notre Dame in all of the other metrics that they look at: strength of schedule, strength of record, all of those types of things. The thing where I think Notre Dame has a gripe, I don't think they have a gripe necessarily when comparing themselves to Miami specifically, because their metrics and their resumes are nearly identical. They have the exact same record, but Miami won head-to-head. So in my opinion, that should put them in over Notre Dame. Where Notre Dame has a gripe is that's been the case for several weeks, and the committee has seemed to try putting those 2 teams against each other and elevating Miami above Notre Dame for whatever reason, and then they do it in the very last selection show that determines which schools actually go to the playoff. I understand why Notre Dame and Notre Dame fans would be upset by the fact that it felt like the rug was pulled from underneath them a little bit with the way that they did that. So I think the committee didn't do things the best way, the most honest way, if I'm being frank, in terms of the way they did things throughout the entire process. Ultimately, I think the final teams, my biggest gripe would have been I would have put Notre Dame in front of Bama, but I also understand why Bama was left in.
Yeah, I firmly believe if Virginia had won the ACC that Notre Dame would be in. And I feel like the fact that Virginia lost to Duke the committee felt some pressure to get an ACC team in there and went with Miami, and Notre Dame, was left out. So certainly, a lot of controversy surrounding that whole situation. We'll get into that more as the show moves along. Last one for you, just from a basketball perspective, Mike, is our first time talking to you since the Tennessee win. How much does that change the complexion of the non-conference schedule, and I guess how much does it boost their chances in your mind that this is a tournament team?
It helps quite a bit because we talked before the season started that this critical 4-game stretch felt like you couldn't go 0-4. And so the fact that you got kind of a rough draw for your last game in Vegas, that doesn't go well. And then you've got this bounce back game is against a top 15 team, and you win that game. I think that's huge it gives you that signature win in the non-conference, sets you up going into conference play because you shouldn't lose another game between now and then if you're a tournament team, and gives you a shot to continue to make your case. The downside is that Tennessee just lost a game to Illinois. I know Illinois is really good. But if you're a Syracuse fan, you want to root for Tennessee to be as good as they possibly can to keep their ranking high, keep their net ranking high, and make that win continue to look impressive as the season goes along.
That was Mike McAllister joining us on our Orange Nation radio show, and we closed out that interview talking college football playoff. I firmly believe, I said it during that interview, I stand by it. I think if Virginia had won the ACC title and had beaten Duke, I think Notre Dame gets in and Miami gets left out. The fact that Virginia lost, I think the committee went out of its way to find a way to get Miami in so that the ACC had a representative. And they had set the precedent last year with SMU, right, that if you play in the conference title game and you're in the field, you can't get bumped out of the field for what happens in your conference title game. So Alabama had to stay. So what happens? Notre Dame is got to be the one that gets left out. There were 3 teams that were deserving of 2 spots. Somebody had to get left out, and the committee, I think, felt pressure to get an ACC team in, and Notre Dame's out.
Would it be easier to just get rid of those conference championship games out? Would you be happier if it was Notre Dame, Virginia, and Alabama, and you left out one of the smaller schools?
So, again, I put this more on the ACC than I do on the system, because the ACC can make up whatever tiebreakers it wants. And if you truly want to have your best team vying for a conference championship and vying for a spot in the college football playoff, then make the tiebreaker the highest-ranked team in the college football playoff poll, which would have been Virginia against Miami instead of Virginia against Duke, because Duke won that convoluted mathematical formula that allowed a 5-loss team to get into the ACC title game. So I put this more on the conference than I do in the college football playoff. I personally like the fact that the conference champ, gets an automatic bid. The 4 highest-ranked, or I guess 5 highest-ranked conference champs, because you're including the group of 5. The 5 highest-ranked conference champs get an automatic bid into the tournament. I'm fine with that. And, the conferences want those title games to mean something that makes those conference title games mean something. I think if the ACC tweaks its rules, and I'm sure we're going to – I would put a lot of money on them changing their rules going into next year to avoid this. I put this more on the conference than I do the CFP.
But what if people start doing what was rumored to happen this year, where did you see Vanderbilt and BYU were talking about flying to Hawaii and playing a game because you can play an extra game in Hawaii or Puerto Rico for some strange reason? And why not schedule those games in advance now?
And you might see that. And, this came up after the show today, and we weren't on the air, but we were talking about Iowa State backing out of a bowl game and Baylor backing out of a bowl game. And Notre Dame, of course, said, you know what, if we're not in the college football playoff, we don't want to play in a bowl game. And there's a thought that bowl games will now be moved to the beginning of the season, and that some of these kickoff games, like we saw Texas, Ohio State, for instance, play each other, or Syracuse, Tennessee, that's another good example. That's put on by a bowl entity. And so you might see some of what we've expected to be postseason bowl games just be played now in the preseason, so you can still put them on, you can still have a marquee matchup, you still get people to go, you still make money, but it may do away with this antiquated bowl system that we have in place, that if you don't make the playoff, that you play in some random bowl that nobody cares about.
Yeah, so it'd be like you fly to Arizona to play in the Tostitos kickoff game.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And that you're almost rewarded before the season than you are at the end of the season. I do think that they're going to have to tweak these rules, because part of the benefit of playing in a bowl game, of course, is that you get the 15 extra practices. But the way it is now with the transfer portal, you got guys opting out. We saw last year with SU's bowl game where Washington State was just decimated because all those guys hit the portal and they were nothing, they didn't look anything like they did during the season. That's going to happen to a lot of teams, right? Yeah. And so they'll have to figure something out moving forward that if you're not in the playoff, what do you do with those teams that are next in line? Like this year, like Texas, Vanderbilt, like, BYU, some of those teams that are really good and they're capable of, potentially, going on a run in the playoff, but they weren't good enough to get in. What do you do with them? Is their season just over? Do they opt out? Or do you incentivize it in such a way? Do you make it so that if you play in those bowl games, you get some extra NIL money or whatever the case may be? I think you have to incentivize it for the players, the coaches, the schools, or you're just going to keep seeing Iowa State and Baylor and Notre Dame. Like more teams are going to follow suit and they're just going to opt out of the postseason.
Steve.
Paulie.
Did you know I was watching a TikTok this weekend? I'd like to do that. And another amazing fact came up about me with the Muppets.
About you?
And Jim Henson. Or for me, sorry. Did you know that people consider the opening, rowboat scene of Emmett Otter's Jug Band Christmas to be the greatest puppeteering of all time?
I did not know that. Why is that?
Because they were all actually under the water holding their breath.
Really?
Doing the puppeteering and moving them in unison to get them to row the boat and so it's wild. Like it wasn't like a remote control boat. There was puppeteers underwater moving them by hand.
That's amazing. How long did that scene last?
I don't know, Steve.
Okay.
Can you just be happy with my nonsense?
happy. I'm happy with the nonsense. I'm happy to know that now. If they were holding their breath, if it was like a 2-minute scene.
It was like mind bending back then.
It's mind bending now. I'm blown away. Great fact.
Thank you.
All right, we are out of time.
Please don't ask follow up.
Okay, well, I got to get better at that. It's such a good fact. I want more.
Wait till after the show and be like, "Yo, I was just wondering, how long did they hold the breath for?"
Such a good fact.
I don't know, Steve.
I want more. All right, we're out of time with that. Maybe somebody is watching that you've piqued their interest. They can Google it themselves.
I win a lot. Google it. Did you see that?
That's right. That's right. Google it. For Paulie, I'm Steve. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll talk to you again tomorrow.
Download the WSYR Plus app on your TV to stream News Channel 9 for free. Just go to your smart TV, search WSYR Plus in the App Store, and download to start streaming today.